Thank you guys so much for talking to me. The main reason you're of interest, obviously, is because you were there on January 6th for all that craziness. In the subsequent days, as we're trying to piece together what the heck actually happened, this is just a real opportunity to get to talk to some people who are actually there. That being said, I know that a lot of people have been getting taken off the internet in the last 48 hours. So I think we have to be very careful as far as what we say. Just, I would really hate for this to not be able to be viewed by anybody. So any opinion as to the veracity of the election, I think we have to pretty much stay away from. If you directly saw something, obviously go for it, say it. But things that could be labeled as conspiracy, even by people who are not intellectually honest in how they're labeling, I think we should try to stay away from, just given the times. So I guess I'll just open it up and let each of you give a little introduction as to who you are, your background, and what brought you to DC that day. You want to go first, Liam?
Okay. I was in DC about a month ago for the second of the rallies. I worked this year on the campaign in Florida, Colorado, and Pennsylvania. I've been active in politics pretty much my entire life locally. I'm a student at the University of Florida, and because of being a conservative and being on campus, I think it's a pretty common story for people, not just at UF, but all across the country, that you're kind of limited in the amount of people who share your political ideology. So I basically just have a group of friends that feel the same way, and that's actually how I ended up going to DC. I ended up going with a friend of mine from South Florida, and then met up with some other friends in South Carolina, and we drove the rest of the way. And from election night, everything that I've known about politics and everything I've seen, I knew on election night that something was strange, and I wanted to figure out why. So I just thought it's just been an interesting few months to kind of answer questions that I've had, and that I guess that's what really led me to DC.
Yeah, that's interesting. By the time that we got through the election and kind of the week after saw the results, I had been spending so much of my time on the Joe Wilson campaign that I was kind of fatigued and didn't follow it super closely. So you were really following all the news and all the court cases for the next couple of weeks.
Oh yeah, and the next couple of months even. They're still ongoing. There's still a lot of cases that are open right now and waiting to be docketed at SCOTUS. So yeah, there's a couple lawyers that I've basically started to watch on YouTube that do live streams, and they basically just break down the new findings, new filings, and everything else. So yeah, it took a lot of my time. My school suffered as a result of it. I'm not gonna lie. So it really became an obsession, because it was a passion of mine before, but then you kind of realize that very rarely do you have such notoriety through the certification process, and a process that most people didn't even know existed before.
Usually it's just a rubber stamp
this time around. Yeah, it is, and 90% of people, probably more than that, had no idea of how much of an issue, how much rigor was put through the certification process. So it was interesting to see, and it was interesting to learn throughout the process. Yeah, I was very, very heavily invested.
So I'll pass the question over now.
So my name's Elaine Moore. I am a student at Furman University. I've always been pretty interested in politics, involved in politics, but I'd say I mostly got very involved with what is going on this past year, especially during the first amount of the year when the election was kind of really getting up and rolling. I, like Liam, started to, even before I'd say the election, I could tell that there was kind of something up. It just seemed a little bit different than it normally was. So I started paying more closer attention, started getting more involved. And I think, during the school year, I received some backlash for my opinions, not only with, always having backlash as being a conservative, or as I consider myself, a libertarian conservative, from people at my school and professors alike. That semester during the election, I received specific backlash from professors, and I knew for certain opinions when they would ask me my opinions. And so, I started really kind of it almost pushed me into it a little bit deeper, because I was thinking, well, if I'm getting such harsh backlash, maybe there is something up, maybe something I should be paying more attention to. And, after the election, I started seeing more signs and really started getting into it more. So I'd say right after the election, I got very involved in a lot of the, rallies and marches and different things that were going on. I went to the second DC that Liam was also at, and to this final DC rally in January the 6th. And I went on the 5th as well. And then other ones at capitals and different things like that. So I've definitely always had a passion for it, but especially with everything going on, I think it has definitely almost struck more of a passion for me, and with my goals of truth and transparency that I don't know if we've seen as much of.
Well, that's very good that you guys have been to multiple rallies. Just, I would love to hear as we progress kind of through the day. I want to kind of just go like timeline throughout the day, how the feeling at that rally compared to the other ones you've been to. So let's start in the morning. About like what time did you guys head out to the National Mall?
We left. We were staying outside of DC. We weren't sure what the situation was going to be in DC, so we were staying outside of DC. So we had to drive to a metro station and then take the metro in. So we left about 6:30, I believe, and got into the National Mall probably around 9, maybe a little bit before then.
So you had about 2 hours until the rally started. I would assume you guys got pretty good positioning if you were there a couple hours early.
No, we were pretty much all the way back to the Washington
funny.
Monument
Wow,
at that point. Yeah.
So was this the biggest crowd you've seen?
There was a lot of people. Yeah. This is. It was eerie the size of the crowd. Having been to a lot of like UF football games and stuff where you have like 90,000 plus people, this was not even close. It was so much more than that. It was really amazing to be there and just to like hear how far the crowd went, because as you're walking there from the metro station, you could hear the crowd from like blocks away, and you couldn't tell where it was, but it was just like this sound that was it's not like anything I've ever heard before.
Yeah, and I got there I got on the metro around 5:30 a.m. I went a little bit earlier. Probably arrived there about 6:30. It was still dark. There was a ton of other protesters that were on the metro as well. It was really packed at 6:30 a.m. And before my phone went out, because our phone service was pretty much out all day, when I was on the metro, I saw that at 5:55 a.m., the line to get in was already 2 miles long. So I knew that we probably wouldn't be getting in. We got there at 6:30, and we were already able to hear the amount of people that were there, and pretty much just walked with the crowd and flowed with them up into the ellipse and the Washington Monument.
So at about 11, the rally begins. I'd assume that there are just an absurd amount of people there. Trump goes on at about 11:50. Where were you guys during this? What was happening? And kind of, can you compare the feeling of that to the previous rallies you'd been to?
I guess so. Before the rally actually started, the group I was with, mainly what we did was we were waiting and we were meeting up with people that had come into the city and we wanted to meet up with. So we weren't doing a whole lot with that was like interesting or pretending like we took pictures with people in that had like an American Eagle hat on and, red, white, and blue suit on. So it was pretty much just a relaxed atmosphere. It was like you're at like a sports event or a sporting event. It was almost like tailgating. So well, except for how cold it was coming from Florida at a tailgate, like you're not going to be freezing. I definitely wasn't dressed for it. It was very cold. So, bought a couple extra layers of Trump socks. But beforehand, it wasn't really much. It was just a mass amount of people just like moving around the National Mall. And, you would have different groups, like there'd be groups that were praying, there'd be groups that would be singing songs, and all of that. But it wasn't beforehand, there wasn't a whole lot of action directed in one way or another. It was pretty much everybody doing their own thing from what I saw anyway.
Yeah, and by that point, we knew we weren't getting in, so we just kind of stayed on the sidelines from about, I'd say, 7 up until it started. So we just kind of stayed with a bunch of other fellow Trump supporters that were there. We got, people walking by, talking, complimenting each other, talking about the current events, talking about each other's lives, their past stories, praying with each other. I mean, really, it's almost, I don't know what else to compare it to other than just, a very friendly atmosphere. And even though you'd never met these people before, everybody was just wanting to talk to each other and wanting to congregate and really just kind of love on each other. That was kind of the, I don't know if you could say odd thing about it, but it was very comforting to be able to get to meet so many openly friendly people who were like-minded. At least politically, and everybody differentiated, I'd say, in different belief systems and ethnicities and backgrounds. It was really amazing.
I mean, you kind of have to be in the top 1% of devotees to Trump to travel all the way to DC to be there. So I'm sure it's a very unique mix of people. I went to a Stop the Steal event in Columbia to interview people, and they were very willing to talk to you, which I thought was very interesting. But they didn't have to go farther than 10 minutes from their house. So I'm sure it's a much less devoted crowd than people that spent hundreds of dollars on airline tickets or drove hours.
I've been to the ones at the Capitol in South Carolina. And I'd say they have the same people that go there, they have the same hearts and really the same drive. A lot of the ones who were at the state capitol wanted to be in DC, and they said, we're praying for you. We are sending all of our best wishes. Let us know how it goes. But the majority of them either weren't able to because of their work or because they had so many kids and were not able to bring, so many young children at the time. I mean, even at the crowd there in DC, there were children, there were disabled people there. I mean, I can't tell you how many wheelchairs I saw and elderly people who were there, and it was freezing cold. I had on 6 layers, and being from South Carolina, I mean, I was barely able to stand it. I don't know how Liam did it because I was barely able to walk at a certain point during the day just because it was so cold. But everybody was there just because, they believed in it, and they knew that, they wanted to fight. And if they didn't fight, who else was going to be able to fight for future generations if we didn't?
What percent of the crowd?
So,
you go.
Well, I just want to build on that real quick because the people that I met that were the most passionate, I guess, none of them were from America originally, which is very interesting to me. So on the Metro Inn, there was a older Asian woman who was basically explaining how she had escaped China and and was warning everybody in America of what life can be like under totalitarianism. I met somebody who escaped the Soviet Union and then fled to China and then had to flee China again. So she was trapped by an authoritarian communist regime twice. So it was interesting to me because you think it's like a patriotic thing or it's a nationalistic thing, but it's really not. Like the people that I met there that were cared the most and were the most vocal about their support of both the president, but also America, weren't from here. And it was just an interesting and eye-opening experience to me. And it made me really think about why is that the case. So
And it's funny because I've been at, I've been to a lot of these, and every single one that I've been to, I would say the vast majority of the ones who, especially the ones who showed up in the beginning, were legal immigrants, and especially from the Asian community. And I would say that those are the ones who are usually the most active at whatever protest, rally, march that is happening. You will be seeing people handing out CCP pamphlets. They'll be handing out newspapers. They'll be talking with you. I mean, it just blows my mind, because they'll sit there and tell you their whole life story about how they fled from communist China, how all of their family is still back there. And one lady even told me that, if she doesn't hear from her family one day and there's no communication, then that's another good day, because that means nothing bad's happened to them yet. So it's very eye-opening, because a lot of these people that are showing up are the ones who have experienced it and who have lived through it and have had families immigrate from those countries specifically to ours, to avoid what they believe we are getting ready to experience within our own country, because all of them say, we are seeing the same exact signs that happened in ours, and they don't want their foster country to become what they fled.
Yeah, I don't think people here quite know the signs to even recognize them. My sister is actually from China, and so I've been very interested in Chinese history, and I've read a couple of books about it. So I can definitely see the cultural struggle sessions that we see are very similar to the Maoist era, and I could see how that would definitely inspire a lot of those people. Now, what was your gauge on the crowd as far as, did they think that at the end of the day, like at the end of these proceedings, Pence was actually going to send it back to the states? Or were they thinking that they were there mostly in a symbolic effort, or was it a mix? Do you have kind of a read on that?
Alaina, if you want to answer this one first.
I think it was a mix, and I mostly think they thought that Pence would send it back, because they thought, there is close to, I mean, we don't have an exact number of how many people were there, but if you look at the photos, I say there was probably 3, maybe 4 million people. I mean, there were people coming in from all sorts of places. No one, could get a number on it. And even the photos that were taken from the sky couldn't even encompass how many people were there. And I believe they thought, if we showed up in the numbers, if we showed that, this is the majority, because everybody there did feel like this was the majority. You don't hear that in the mass media, and you don't hear that in the colleges. But if you walk outside of those higher education, if you walk outside the building of, CNN or wherever else, there is a lot of common people who have these values and who do support the president. And I think the majority of people really did think, that democracy wouldn't fail them, and that their voices would be heard. And I know that there were prayer vigils for Vice President Pence all during that week leading up at his house. So people have been praying over this and hoping for this and asking, for God's will. So I think that while there was a mixture of that, I think a lot of people did lean on thinking that, it would be sent back to the states, but no one was sure.
Yeah, I definitely got like the feeling that most of the crowd believed that it would be sent back. Personally, I didn't. Going in and and on the trip up, like I didn't expect it to happen. I knew there was a possibility, but I didn't expect it to happen. But you could tell from the energy of the crowd that most people did, and I think that's a good thing, because it kept the energy of the crowd up, and it made sure that people were like energized and involved. So although I might have been a little bit more pessimistic than most going in, I think it's pretty fair to say that the majority of the people there, based on their energy and the way that they were talking and people around them were talking, believed that Pence would send it back. Obviously, that changed a little bit as the day unfolded, but yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, given the Trump legal team's inability to show in pretty much any court of law any significant voter fraud. It would be pretty crazy of Pence to have turned that around. I mean, that would have disenfranchised like millions of people.
Well, one quick note on the whole legal battle. To my knowledge, all of the dismissals have been purely procedural. So whatever arguments have been made like pre-trial. So we haven't had an opportunity to actually present any evidence. None of the affidavits, none of the discovery has ever been opened. So whenever people say that, oh, there's no evidence, the only reason they can say that is because we still have not had an opportunity to present any evidence. So expert testimony, affidavits from people on the ground, mathematical expert witnesses, statistical witnesses, all of them have made statements, but none of them have actually been heard in a court of law yet. Hopefully that changes, but it's an interesting thing because people don't really understand, for the most part, what the legal losses on the Trump side mean.
Yeah, they're mostly, not having standing and getting thrown out. Judge basically saying, I'm not even going to hear this. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, the latches argument for me is the one that just drives me up the wall. I don't understand how people can make that argument that you waited too long until after, by waiting to bring the suit until after the election, you waited too long to bring the suit. But if you brought the suit before the election, you would have no harm, and
you would have no. You need to have harm to have standing.
Right. So I think it's, I want to go into law. But one of the issues with law is that you can make an argument on both sides. So it is a little bit frustrating sometimes whenever you can't get a hearing on the evidence.
Yeah, and I think that this is something that will be continued to be debated probably for the rest of our lifetimes politically, what the veracity of this election. But the reality is that it was too late at that point. I mean, the Trump legal team had failed to get anything moving. So I believe that all the objections that the lawmakers are making were purely symbolic, since they mathematically couldn't have done anything. And it's interesting that you think that the crowd was kind of not on the same page. And even Trump had to know that. He's not an idiot. Yet he was whipping the crowd up just as if there really was a shot. Like if they marched down there, I think he was looking towards 24, just trying to keep the energy up, and kind of miscalculated as to what was going to happen. But I'm kind of getting out over my skis here as far as just talking through the day. I don't really want to talk about my opinion, so that's not that interesting. What's interesting is the fact that you two were there. So during Trump's speech, what was it like? What was the crowd like? I'd assume that they were very fired up.
Yeah, I mean, having been at Trump rallies before, it was interesting because he had a couple highlight moments, but overall, it wasn't as electric of a speech as he normally gives, which was interesting. But the crowd energy was still there, and I think partly because the crowd had been there for so long and had kind of built a life of its own, they weren't really affected by that. But as somebody who's kind of followed it maybe more closely than most people who were there, and somebody who worked on the campaign, it was a little bit of the tone of the speech was different. He started going through state by state with what the evidence was of voter fraud, and that's a little bit more nuanced than you'd normally see in a Trump stump speech. So it was interesting to me to watch. But it definitely didn't hurt the crowd energy. There was a massive American flag being passed around, that you see brought out on football fields before games. They were just being passed around the crowd the entire time. People were happy to be there. People were excited to be there. So it didn't affect them, but it was an interesting little difference.
Do you have any comments from during the speech, Elena?
I agree with what Liam said. I mean, I would say that a lot of people that were standing there were definitely trying to listen as hard as we could. We were outside the ellipse, so there were a few times where we couldn't hear what people were saying or what President Trump was saying. People were trying to look it up on their phones sometimes. Every now and then when it would get out, they would try and look up on their phones. And of course, our signal was being blocked. So we weren't able to get on the internet, but after a while they turned up the speakers. We were able to hear kind of what was going on, and I'd say that a lot of people were they were very attentive listening to what was going on. I mean, there wasn't too much rowdiness or anything. I know the lady beside me was in a wheelchair sitting there trying to kind of warm her legs up, but listening at the same time, because everybody who was there was in it for the long run. They didn't, just come to see the sights. They were there to hear what their president had to say. And I believe, like I said, people had such a great attitude about it. They were very attentive, very peaceful, and it was just a very calming atmosphere.
So speech wraps up around 1, which is when the lawmakers are gathering in the Capitol to start certifying votes, the Electoral College. At about 1:10, that's when people started clashing with the police at the Capitol. My question is, in the time between the president's speech ending and the craziness beginning over at the Capitol, kind of where are you guys? When do you become aware? Because obviously your cell phone signal is limited as to like what is happening. What does the next kind of 2 hours look like for you guys? Because I'm sure that this was one of the crazier 2 hours of your life.
Well, I kind of disagree that it was crazy, because when we were walking over, it was it was actually very calm. People were talking with each other. They were chanting. A lot of people were praying, sharing their stories. We get up there and, everybody's just at the Capitol, and it's actually a very calm atmosphere. I wasn't seeing any clashing with the police at the time. What we were all kind of, we had made our way over to the Capitol. Everybody was there. Everybody was, chanting USA. They were chanting "We the People," freedom, just, the normal things that you would hear at a rally. And then all of a sudden we start hearing popping noises. And that's when the tear gas was being released, and everybody was very confused because we didn't really know what was going on at the time or why we were being tear gassed. I think there was some confusion to that, because for the entire time that we were there, it was very peaceful. Of course, it was a little rowdy just because people were talking and we were chanting, but it was the same things that you would hear at any other protest or any other rally. And that's when I start seeing, these police kind of coming forward at the steps, and there's more tear gassing and people are really confused. And then as we're trying to figure out what's going on, we're looking at our phones, we are getting nothing. And then I see all these, I'd say men probably in their 60s and older women coming out with red faces, not being able to open their eyes. And they're like, they're tear gassing us. We don't know what's going on, trying to get water into their eyes. That was my experience personally. I wouldn't say I wasn't like on the Capitol, but I was closer to the Capitol than a lot of the people that were there. So I'd say that, it wasn't a crazy 2 hours of my life. It was a normal protest. And then there was tear gassing. Liam, you can go ahead and share what you saw.
Yeah, well, so right at the end of the speech, well, maybe not right at the end, but for about 30 minutes before we wrapped up, maybe, the now famous guy, with the face paint and everything, he walked 6 inches in front of my face. And
wow.
It's memorable because I was there with the whole group, and we all see him coming. He's cutting through the crowd diagonally across us. And we see him coming, and we're trying to laughing. He's out there, I'm freezing. Nobody told me that jeans freeze. I'm from Florida. I've never dealt with this, but evidently jeans freeze, which is weird. So I'm just, trying to stay warm. And this guy walks in front of us with, a Davy Crockett hat, and he's like shirtless, and he's carrying a spear. And it's just like, what is happening? So we were all laughing at it at the time. If I'd only known, I would have taken a picture with him or of him or something. But he was walking across with a group of about, 5 or 6 other guys his age. The rest of them either had like backpacks or tactical backpacks. Some of them had charcoal gas masks strapped onto the back of their backpack, which I found odd in the time. I pointed it out to a couple of my friends that I was with. I was like, I wonder why they have that. So I didn't think much of it. I was trying to listen to the speech. I didn't want to get distracted. But it was it was an amazing realization on the way back home later that day. I was like, oh my gosh, this guy was right
Those
in front
were
of
the
us.
guys.
And then, 2 hours later, he's sitting in the, the House chamber of the dais. But yeah, so we left, right after the speech, and started walking up Pennsylvania Avenue. That was a really cool moment, because like the crowd just like extended in every direction, and you could see there was some construction happening, and there were some people up on the top of buildings taking videos, and I just think it'd be an amazing shot to see.
Sure.
So I got down to the Capitol area right before 2. And at that point, everything seemed pretty almost boring. A couple of our group were like, okay, we're going to go to the hotel room. We're going to like go warm up, get some food. And I was like, oh, I want to go take some pictures over at the Teddy Roosevelt statue, and then we'll meet you there. So I had no intention really of staying for that long. It looked like it was going to be pretty boring. I thought that as the certification kind of went on, people would just be milling about. And frankly, I was too cold to want to mill about with them. Of course, that kind of changed very quickly as I walked over to the reflection pool and took some videos of the crowd extending, both Pennsylvania and Constitution Avenue up to the Capitol, like lining the reflection pool. It was quite a sight. And then I turned around and kind of walked over towards the Capitol. I was standing on the street with a couple of others. We got separated. There's just a few of us because we got separated from our group. And we started hearing these bangs. And my family has done fireworks. It's been a family business for a long time. And it sounded like 3-inch canister shells with like the lifts taken off, just being thrown. We weren't exactly sure where. And then we start to see up on the Capitol steps, just like puffs of tear gas. So it sounded like they're throwing flashbangs as well. And it was, well, you didn't really realize what was happening at the time. We were probably a good, close to 100 yards away from them at the time. We were staying on the street. We were, had no interest, I guess, in going up there, especially once we realized what was happening. But it was amazing to watch. And the police presence was weird and confusing. Just kind of watching it from the back, I didn't understand what the police were doing, why their numbers would, there'd be a couple of them and there'd be a bunch of them and then it would be back to a couple of them. They were kind of moving about, and I was never sure what was happening, but I was kind of watching it all unfold. It was like watching a movie. All the while, more tear gas. People were coming past me just like covered in milk and water, trying to get it out of their eyes. I felt bad for them because not because they're tear gas, but because it was so cold. I couldn't imagine being soaking wet when it was that cold out. And that's when I noticed a couple of Black Bloc members biked up beside me and they had walkie-talkies. They started pointing things out, talking to each other, and then they kind of moved on after watching the proceedings for a moment, and it seemed like they're circling the building. Which I found weird. And I was a little bit nervous because I took a couple pictures of them and they immediately then started to look at me sideways. So I kind of separated myself from the rest of my friends so that they wouldn't get caught just in case something did happen. But having not gone very close, it was just a confusing scene because it didn't seem that from being in the crowd, it didn't seem like it was rowdy. It seemed like it was boring until all of a sudden it got escalated. And I can't speak to how or why or what happened up there, but it was weird because 10 minutes before I was bored and I was cold and I wanted to go back to the hotel room and warm up. So it was a weird shift. And it was a shock to me, just like watching it all unfold.
And I think an interesting thing that I also saw that Liam kind of mentioned was the police presence that were there. When we were there wasn't really anybody out there, which I think was a little odd since it is the Capitol building. You would almost expect to see a lot of security or a lot of police presence, especially, if there was a planned peaceful protest there. And that's why, like Liam said, like in the beginning, it was pretty boring. We were like, okay, so what happens now? Does anything happen, or we go home now? It's over. We've kind of done our duty here. And then, that's when I think police started coming out of the Capitol building and popping off tear gas, and we were all really confused. Everybody was kind of looking around like, okay, where do we go? What do we do? Do we help anybody? I mean, what's really going on at the time? And as that's happening, I look over to the south side of the Capitol, and there's probably about 20 to 30 police officers coming over either on foot or on bikes, coming very swiftly over to the Capitol. And then they get to the south side, and then they stop and they just kind of stand there and watch there as the crowd is being tear gassed. And after a few minutes, I'd probably say 2 or 3 minutes, they turn around and they go back. And I found that a little odd that, so many police officers would come up, kind of watch what's going on and then leave. Because at that point there was a lot of confusion as to why people were being tear gassed. And then I heard some rumors that, people that the police were starting to shoot rubber bullets, which was another thing that I found a little concerning and confusing. I think a lot of people were just confused as to what was happening. I know the only thing I could get through my phone at the time was a few text messages from my friend. She knew I was in DC at the time and was sending me kind of updates of what she was seeing. And she said, hey, are you okay? Like, there's a standoff in the Capitol right now. People are in the Capitol and we're outside, and we're like, what are you talking about? We don't see anything like that or hear anything like that. It was just very odd, the messages that I was getting that was being portrayed compared to what we were actually seeing and hearing at the time.
Yeah,
So-
on that note, so I left the Capitol building probably about 2:45. I head back to the hotel room. I mean, there was still tear gas off. At that point, I don't know if I hadn't registered what was happening, but I was at this point bored of the tear gas going off. And I went back to the hotel room to try and warm up a little bit. And we turn on the news, and on the news they're like, it's an incredibly dangerous situation. Everybody around here is, it's incredibly violent. And, I was there 10 minutes beforehand. And I was like, there's not, from everything I could see, most of the people were, taking pictures with the crowd, or taking pictures with the statues, or taking pictures with, the Washington Monument behind them. They're just sitting around watching. Like, you had a couple people on megaphones trying to, like, rile people up. You had a couple people that were kind of running around, but 98% of the crowd probably was just kind of milling about. You had people sitting on the side of the reflection pool eating lunch that they had brought because everybody knew that there would be no food available. So it was really strange because it was definitely presented on all media that I've seen as a way more drastic situation than it was. Like, it was bad in the Capitol, like, everything that happened in there. But from my experience at being there on the ground, it really wasn't that strange. It wasn't dangerous. And I didn't even know any of the other stuff was happening until I started to hear people talk beside me, and then get back to the hotel room and see the way they were portraying it. So it was another like shock as to how the day was unfolding.
And I was there up until about 4 o'clock. I saw, how it went afterwards. And, after they did some tear gassing, and there were rumors, I heard about, some people being shot with rubber bullets. After, I want to say maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes of that ensuing, it almost kind of went back to normal. Like, there were police officers that, went back into the Capitol. There wasn't even as much of a presence as there was during the time of tear gassing. There was some confusion, but people, were kind of taking care of each other. There were a few people, like Liam said, that were either had like little megaphones or were trying to get people riled up. But it was funny when they started doing that, other people around me were basically telling that person, like, stop, that's crazy. That's not what we're here for. Just calm down. And if there, I heard of, if there were a few agitators in there, the Trump supporters were almost kind of taking care of themselves and just saying, stop, go back. Like, we are not doing that. Some people would be saying, oh, go forward, keep pushing. And others are like, what are you talking about? We're not pushing. That's not what we're here for. And it was very interesting how the crowd almost took care of itself, because there were a few agitators, and I did hear rumors of Antifa agitators, but everybody, I never really saw that. I saw some people that looked odd and didn't kind of look like they should be there. But like I said, a lot of the Trump supporters were keeping it as peaceful as possible. And if you heard somebody loud shouting in the back, you almost kind of tuned them out, because you knew that's why we weren't here for, and nobody was acting on that.
So there was a voice for pushing forward, but it was generally, I mean, obviously the amount of people you saw, even though it was a huge amount of people scaling the walls of the Capitol and breaking in, is still maybe a couple thousand on the outside of the Capitol that really went up there, and then a couple hundred that went in, as compared to the huge crowd that was there. So you would say that most people are kind of like, what are you even talking about?
Yeah, it was kind of almost like, we were all talking there, and I think that was the neatest thing, is that we kind of got to hear everybody's perspectives. And the majority of us echoed, well, all of us, I'd say, were echoing the same sentiments. Like, we are tax-paying people. We are bringing our issue to the federal building that, is ours. Like, they treated that as, that is our building. We want to take care of it. That's our democracy. And that's why we're bringing the issue that we have, our concerns that we have, to the lawmakers themselves. So they were there simply to voice their opinions, like the rest of us. And, there was no want of harming anything, because that was almost like harming our own property. You don't want to hurt something that you have or something that you stand for. And I'd say that was the big attitude that was there at the moment. And if there was someone that was trying to do that, there was a lot of people holding people back. And there's a lot of videos that have come out to show that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the guys that was like the instigators, I guess, it was funny because he was standing on I guess it was the west side of the Capitol, kind of facing the reflection pool, and he had a megaphone, and he was trying to get people to come over the wall. But he was probably older. He was probably in his 60s. He had long hair, and every couple minutes, as he was trying to use the loudspeaker, would just start playing some very basic instrumental of Flight of the Bumblebee, and he couldn't figure out how to turn it off. So you just watch him try and fumble with it, and some of his buddies would come over and they try and figure it out, and it was happening 20 feet in front of me, and I thought it was just funny, and we were all laughing about it. Nobody was taking him seriously. Nobody was listening to him. But it was just kind of a little bit of entertainment. It was like a sideshow to circus almost. So the people that were instigating and were trying to get people to push forward and come on, like they almost like felt like they're trying to play act or something. They felt like they're in a movie, but from what I saw, nobody was really taking them seriously.
Yeah, I mean, the Capitol would have been completely overwhelmed if the sentiment of the majority of the crowd was that was something that was worth doing, which, thank God it wasn't.
Yeah.
So what did you think? Like, you get back to your hotel room and you're like, what was I just there for? I would assume it's kind of the question as you're seeing like what is going on actually inside the building that I'm sure you couldn't see.
I mean, sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
So I went back at about 4:30, and so I've been to a lot of these before, and the main idea that it kind of all the Trump supporters would tell each other is make sure you're not out here past dark, because when you're out there past dark, that's usually when a lot of BLM and Antifa agitators come out aggressively. And there's they're usually not there for good reasons. And so I was hearing things like don't go to Metro Center, because that's where there's a lot of BLM and Antifa. Make sure you kind of stay away from there, try to get home as fast as you can. And that's what I have done at the majority of these things is especially being a girl, you try a lot of times Antifa at these different places target women, children, and elderly. And there's, a lot of videos that I've seen, a lot of people that I've talked to that have experienced it. And it is very scary because I have seen it before and usually try to avoid it as much as possible. So we were trying to get back, which is why we left around 4 to get back before it got dark. And we got on the metro. It was pretty safe getting back. We were definitely trying to make sure we were safe. There was no one around us that would cause us harm, because it is a big concern. And it is sad that, you're scared of being attacked for just believing in something. But it was a reality, and it's a reality that has happened at all of these rallies or prayer walks or marches. So when we did get back, we, our phones finally started working when we got outside of DC. And there's all of these things saying that there was a standoff and a shooting and all these agitators that were that were in the Capitol and all these other things. And then I get a notification saying, everything's resuming back at 8, which we were all very confused, because we were thinking, we didn't see or hear any of this. And it was very frustrating, because we are seeing how it's being portrayed, and how people are calling us terrorists and racists and all these different names. And it was honestly really sad and disconcerting, because, we were there for a reason, for our voices to be heard in a peaceful manner. And it was not being portrayed that way. So I think especially for me, I was frustrated, because, as a person who is there because she wants to fight for what she sees as her individual rights and election integrity and other things like that, that's not what was being portrayed.
Yeah, I'm sure that this is how the people that show up during the day to show solidarity at a Black Lives Matter protest feel when at night a bunch of people go and loot a store. It really delegitimizes the cause that you feel is a legitimate cause.
But I would point out, at this one, there wasn't, a lot of people are calling it a riot. And I would not use that term, because being there and seeing what did happen, it was nowhere close to a riot. Nothing was burned. The very few people that may have been agitators were handled to a certain extent. And that's, not what we see. There isn't footage that they're able to say that we were burning buildings down or we were attacking people. There honestly has been no footage of that I have seen or have heard of. And, I think it is very important to point out kind of the difference of maybe some things that we saw during the summer compared to the many protests and marches that have happened, with Trump supporters.
Yeah, we can thank God that they did not light things on fire, that those pipe bombs that were placed at the DNC and RNC didn't actually explode, because that would have completely changed the tenor of that day, even to make it even worse. I mean, how do you feel?
Yeah, there's one, I don't know if there's a
there?
video of the inside the Capitol of the people having like trash cans were knocked over. So there's like the video, I don't know if you've seen it online, of people going around with like the trash bags and like picking up the trash that had been like knocked over and everything, which is weird because, in a riot that doesn't happen. And obviously there were areas and there were a very small group of people, that got inside the Capitol one way or another, that did cause some property damage and did seem to be there for the wrong reasons. But, you also saw people who were there kind of just like walking through as a tourist, like obeying the velvet ropes. And then you saw the people picking up the trash that had been knocked over. It's a really confusing thing. And I'm obviously, we can only speculate now, which we shouldn't do, as to how everything happened. But it's weird because there seems to be very different motivations for people in the Capitol. They weren't there to cause harm or cause destruction for the most part. So it was just an interesting dichotomy. And then to watch everybody cover it as though everybody that was inside the Capitol was there to do bad things. Just isn't borne out from the video that I've seen from inside the Capitol.
And I think it's interesting that I've also seen a video or two of police actually letting a lot of people in through, I think, one of the back doors. And I think, you see photos even of older individuals standing there almost sightseeing in the Capitol, which, you know, you would think is one of the most secure places to get into. But as you can see through other videos of them actually being let in. So I think that's something, you know, we haven't seen, that hasn't really been produced by main media sources, that I think would make kind of help people understand, you know, how so many people got in.
Certainly, yeah. It was definitely there's a lot of different motives within the people that were at the protest, a lot of different motives with people in the Capitol. I was watching this interview with a NPR reporter who was there that said that there was a bunch of people that were coming up to her asking like if she knew where the bathroom was, which was just like indicative of me to the fact that not everyone was there like going crazy. There was people that like had to pee.
Yeah, you know, Mayor Bowser actually removed the porta potties that were usually there in DC, and I think Liam can attest as well as I can how difficult it was to find a bathroom, and how when there was a bathroom or a porta potty, there was usually a 2 to 3 hour wait to get into, which was something that I think everybody was really frustrated out, because we were cold. We had come from, me and Liam had come from southern states, so we were freezing our butts off.
Yeah.
And we were trying not to drink any water or eat anything, because we knew, we had heard that Mayor Bowser had removed a lot of porta potties. And then there were, I had gone into some businesses. A lot of businesses were closed at the time, and other businesses that were open, we would walk into and be like, hey, could we, pay for a cup of coffee or something and use your bathroom? And the majority of the times the bathrooms, weren't being allowed to be used. And if there was one that was being, there was a Starbucks that we had finally found, and they had 2 bathrooms, but of course, there was only one bathroom they were letting us use. So we had to stand in a line for about 45 minutes even to use that one bathroom.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser, for that. So I guess we'll move on to, after this whole event, I know you've been putting, Elena, you've been putting a lot on your social media about it, and you've definitely not been well received by Instagram on that front. Would you like to talk about that?
Absolutely. When I got back that evening, I immediately saw what was on the news, and I was frustrated. So I, decided that there's no better way than to tell what I saw in my story. So I started writing, and I started typing, and I typed up something as quickly as possible. I read through it, edited where I could, and then took the footage that I had and I posted it, and immediately started, getting backlash. And then I would say that I did get backlash, but I'd say I received more support than I did backlash, of people saying, wow, thank you so much for sharing this. We had no idea. People, the majority of people, I think, were shocked, because they were hearing this one narrative throughout the entire day. And little did they know, there were people who were actually there that they knew that had a completely different story. So I posted it, and within a few hours, it was taken down by Instagram, saying that they took it down because of violence or violent organization that was shown within the post, which I thought was interesting, because I posted a photo of the large crowd that was there at the Capitol, and then another photo of, or a video of people there singing Amazing Grace together, which was probably one of the most powerful, I think, moments when I was there, of people standing just around each other, singing and praying together and holding hands. And it was immediately taken down. So I decided to repost it. And then it started, of course, continuing to get some backlash, and was taken down a second time. And I saw that morning that it was the next morning that had been taken down. So I put it up a third time. And I was like, I really hope this one sticks, because I want as many people to see this message as possible. to have at least a fair understanding of what was going on in both sides to the story. And then it was taken down again, and I received a message from Instagram saying that they were threatening to delete my account if they saw any similar activity left. I was trying to respond to people that were responding to me about it, and eventually I was disabled from sending messages. A friend of mine, it started getting passed around at my college. I started to receive a lot of backlash from that, but I'd say I've received even more positive notes from people saying, people shouldn't be sending you the notes they are, or using your name like they are. And my friend started responding to people who were kind of slandering me on their social media accounts, and then she was disabled. So it seemed that anybody that was saying any positive notes about DC or about my post were receiving the same attitude that I received from Instagram.
Liam, have you put anything up since then that Instagram has found objectionable?
I put a couple things up. So I had no cell for the entire time I was in there. So unfortunately, me and Alaina were not able to actually connect while we were in DC. But as soon as we got out of there pretty early. So by the time we were in the car on the way back from the metro station back into Virginia, I had to turn off my phone and everything and restart it to finally get service. And I started to see on social media how it was being portrayed. So I put up a lot of the pictures that I had taken and videos and some that had been sent to me and that I had found previously. And a lot of them were labeled this is false information, here's a fact check. There was one post, it was from a Philadelphia Antifa organization that I put up that was basically them calling for people to disguise themselves as Trump supporters and go in with weapons. So I posted that, and that was labeled as false information. And after that, I saw very quickly the way things were headed for social media, especially Twitter and Instagram. I've never used Facebook. So I ended up actually deleting my Twitter. I went through and decided it really wasn't worth it, because everything that I was putting out was either, is being censored because it was about election fraud or it was about being peaceful in DC. And, both of those truths are now viewed as wrong speak, I guess, to take an Orwellian term. So the social media platforms didn't seem to be serving the purpose that I thought they should have, as in providing an area of free speech. So I ended up deleting Twitter a couple days after that. So, and I pretty much just refrained from posting anything else because between the atmosphere at my college, the fact checks, and the censorship of big tech, and how ingrained people are in their positions on these type of things, there's no real point in my mind of trying to push back on these platforms. Not saying that it's not important to try and get the truth out, but I don't think it's really possible on these mediums.
Yeah, Instagram is the only social network that I use frequently, personally, just browsing throughout the day. And so I frequently put political stuff up on there, but I mostly keep it to statements of opinion over statements of fact, because I find that statements of fact are the ones that will get you thrown off, where statements of opinion, it's what are they going to, I feel the way I do about monetary policy, at least for now, that's okay. But I'm going to throw this up there and, just hope that this gets to stay, because I think that it's very valuable to see, you guys were there clearly doing First Amendment protected activities, and to try to characterize the vast group of people that were there trying to do First Amendment protected activities, whether you agree with the claims that most of that crowd believed on the veracity of the election or not. It's important that your experience not be just completely scrubbed off the face of the internet.
I agree.
Yeah, it's a daunting. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I definitely agree with that. There has been a lot of people who've called me many different names, and I'd say probably the most is a terrorist, which I found very interesting, or insurrectionist. And as anybody around you will tell me, I can be one of the most peaceful people you'll ever meet, which I found really interesting. Just for exercising my First Amendment rights, I'm suddenly being labeled with all these names, which is something I would have never called anyone, even if they went to another protest where there seemed to be burning of buildings or burning of flags or anything like that, that even held violence, just because that is your First Amendment right.
Yeah. If you guys have pictures, videos, I'd love to overlay it over this. I think that will dramatically increase its chances of being pulled down. But
I can send them to you. I have a box folder
I think it's
where
worth.
most of them are. So
awesome. Well, unless you guys have anything else to add, I think that we've kind of walked through the day in a very interesting way.
Yeah, it was an interesting day.
Yep. I would just say, I think a lot of people were there for very peaceful means. A lot of people felt, a lot of people that were there in who you probably wouldn't see at a normal protest. You saw people from all ethnicities, all different ages, and a lot of them all who have jobs who, felt like they needed to be there for a reason. And I think that's something that isn't being shared. That there are people from all walks of life who felt like their voices needed to be heard, and that they wanted to, be there to support their country, to support the future generations, to support their children, and again, to just voice their concern.
And one last question, I guess, before you guys go is, how does this all affect your support for Trump going forward? Would you like to see him run in 24?
Wait, can you ask the question one more time? I'm sorry, it froze.
Yeah, I think the internet crapped out there. How does this affect your support of Trump going forward? And would you support him running in 24?
Well, for me, I always make a decision based on the information that I have in front of me, and for that, it would depend on who he's running against. I don't think, on a larger note, I think it's really important that we don't blame a face of a movement for the acts of a couple of people. And I think this cuts both ways. We've seen this on the left and right over the last year, especially. So whenever people say that Trump was calling for violence and inciting violence and everything, I was at the speech, and I can say definitively he was not, and to my knowledge, never has. I don't think that there are a lot of legitimate attacks on the president, but I don't think that is one of them. I think that his policy overall has been pretty good, and I think that assuming he has the opportunity, is able to run again, and chooses to run again, I wouldn't say I would support him. I wouldn't say I wouldn't support him. It depends who he's running against. It depends what the field looks like. And it depends what America looks like in 4 years. It depends what America needs in 4 years. So it doesn't, I'm not one of the people that say, Trump is the only person I'll support in 2024. And I'm definitely not one of the people that will say I'll never support him again. And I don't support him now. I think that he's done a lot of good things. And I think that, especially for the events of January 6th, it hasn't been presented fairly, in my opinion.
I would definitely wholeheartedly agree with what Liam said. I haven't really seen, I have seen President Trump's policies. I have definitely done my research as to where I can, but because I feel like, you should be able to make your own opinion based on evidence and fact that you have gathered from both sides. That's something that I have done, especially being as involved in politics as I have been for years. And I would definitely say that I would support President Trump. It's definitely up to what America needs at the time, but there's nothing that has happened that so far that would change my opinion of him. I'd say that it definitely hasn't changed since what has happened at these rallies, what happened on the 6th. I feel like Liam said it wasn't presented fairly, but there would be nothing, that happened that day that would make my support of him waver.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you both for your time. I really appreciate it. I will have this up and hopefully have it up for a long time.
Hopefully. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.